Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bull Take Scouting Podcast. We're kind of in the lull of the NFL calendar right now where, the draft's behind us, training camp hasn't started yet. So let's take a look at the lay of the land in the NFL, see who's really improved the most this year around the league, and see who could really be taking a big step forward in 2021 or in 2022, who could be the next Bengals, for example.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not the next Bengals, but let's start off talking about the Lions and what they did. And I'd say mostly through the draft with their first round picks and adding Aiden Hutchinson and Jamison Williams. I know we've talked about these picks quite a few times already, but I really think, especially Aiden Hutchinson, will help change the culture in Detroit. And maybe they didn't add a ton of really, really good players in the offseason, but I think getting a guy like Aiden Hutchinson that can be the cornerstone of your defense, that's got a great mentality to bring to Detroit, which is also his hometown team. I really think he can help change the Lions' mentality as a team, and help propel that team forwards. Maybe not to a winning record, but possibly to 6-7 wins, just because of that mentality that Dan Campbell brings.
Yeah, I like that you brought them up early because it would surprise a lot of people if the Lions ended up winning 7 games, and I think it could really happen. You saw a team that had a rocky year last year, but they kept buying in to what Dan Campbell was trying to sell them in terms of just stick your head forward. We're going to be biting kneecaps. We're going to be the high effort team, and we're going to just go out every Sunday and play the best football we can. And I think that's what we saw towards the end of the year. They notched some really good wins against the Vikings, against the Cardinals. These were teams that were in the playoff hunt. I think that really shows that the arrow's pointing up in Detroit. And even if they didn't go out and make the biggest free agency additions, I think that with what they added in the draft and just with the general trend of where that team was going towards the end of the season, it makes sense the Lions would take a step forward.
Yeah, and let's just look at the NFC North, for example. I mean, you have the Packers obviously up at the top, but then you have the Bears and the Vikings as the other two
Yeah.
teams. And I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if all three of those teams are competing for the second place in the NFC North, just because we don't really know where the Vikings are. New head coach Kirk Cousins is, kind of treading water right now. We're not sure if they want to keep him long term. The Bears, I think they really struggled to add pieces this offseason, and we'll talk about that a little later. But I mean, the Lions got a lot better with the talent that they added, and I think they're probably a little worse off right now than the Bears and the Vikings. But halfway through the season, get some play some games, get some more experience behind them. I think they could be on par with those two teams.
Yeah, I think they could definitely split with those two teams, go 1-1 and pick up at least 2 wins in the division, which would really go a long way towards hitting those 7 wins. And I think that would be a successful next step in the Lions rebuild. Is year one, lose a lot of games, but year two, you're competitive. You're not going to the playoffs, but you're competitive and you have a few more wins. And then next year, maybe you're looking at finding that next quarterback and really moving forward with that rebuild in a better way. I think another team, or maybe really the only other team that was, at the top of the draft order, one of the worst teams last year that could take a big step forward and get into that 7+ win territory are the Jets. And if you look at what they've added this offseason, they have really gotten better. They have, in terms of just which roster has infused the most talent across all positions, the Jets might be number one in the NFL. I mean, you've got Sauce Gardner was a terrific pick. That with DJ Reed at cornerback, now you're going from a position that was really poor to a strong one. They've got Jordan Whitehead also in the secondary to shore it up. On offense, you're looking at Garrett Wilson at wide receiver alongside Elijah Moore, Corey Davis. You got Breece Hall, which forms a really good RB tandem with Michael Carter. And the offensive line is fortified too by the arrival of Laken Tomlinson. And I think that Joe Douglas not selecting Ike Ekwonu, even though he was rumored to really like him, means that they're confident that Mekhi Becton could get back to his rookie year form. So it all hinges on the play of Zach Wilson, but he's a prospect we liked coming out. And the roster is looking good. So the only doubt I have in my mind is almost that, it's the Jets. And you have this feeling that they're going to find a way to not be able to live up to expectations. but I really like what Joe Douglas has done to build up that roster, and especially to be competitive. Maybe like the Lions at around 7 wins this year.
Yeah, I mean, as a Jets fan, the front office and the head coach seem to be different than what you'd call the same old Jets with John Idzik, Mike McCagnon, Rex Ryan. So I have a lot of faith in what Joe Douglas has done, and I completely agree that basically ignoring the offensive line altogether in the draft and the offensive tackle position in free agency really kind of shows me that Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh trust that Mekhi Becton is going to figure it out and revert to his rookie form. And, if he does, they could have a really, really good offensive line with, Elijah Vera Tucker, Laken Tomlinson, George Fant. And, they've given Zach Wilson everything he needs to succeed.
Yeah.
They have a potential, franchise wide receiver in Garrett Wilson, even though he wasn't our wide receiver one. We still both think that he's a really good wide receiver prospect. And then he has Elijah Moore, who towards the end of the season he started to look really good with. They formed a nice connection, and then they got him a couple of tight ends, and those excuse me, those guys will help him if he starts to get in trouble, with a pass rush or anything, dump it off to the tight ends. And they have a really good running back tandem, and that defense looks a lot better than it did last year with Sauce Gardner, Jermaine Johnson. So they're in a loaded AFC, so I wouldn't say they're in playoff contention this year, but definitely I think 7, maybe even 8 wins to finish with an 8-9 record could potentially be where the Jets are next year. And I think in 2023 is where they would have to make their playoff push.
Yeah, I think that the way they built the roster this offseason really shows that they've evaluated correctly Zach Wilson's rookie year and see how they could really play to his strengths and minimize the weaknesses that we saw during the year. For like you said, I mean, the additions of Uzama, Conklin, and Rucker at tight end show a big emphasis to just relay the message to him that you don't have to play hero ball. You don't have to look for the 60-yard strike at any point, because that's often what he was doing at BYU. This is the NFL. You're going to have to be a little more conservative. So here you go. These are these big veteran targets who are going to be your safety valve pretty much. And then at running back, Breece Hall and Michael Carter are both fantastic receiving options too. So there's a lot of, just short dump down option if he's facing pass rush issues. And then the other thing is that I think they failed to maximize his ability to throw the deep ball at the same time. He was looking to do so, and it sometimes it results in interceptions, partly because he didn't really have any targets that specialized in that. And I think Garrett Wilson's a player who we saw him more as a possession receiver at Ohio State, but I think he has the potential to be a downfield threat, and I'd like to really see that get unleashed with Zach Wilson. So at once they managed to get a receiver who can stretch the field, but they've also really reinforced so some of the safer options in the short and intermediate range for him to rely on if he needs to.
Yeah, and just before we move on to some of the higher ranked teams, I want to touch on the Giants really quickly. I know we mentioned that the Lions and the Jets probably are the two most improved teams. I'd throw the Giants as the third. I think with those two first-round picks, picking Kayvon Thibodeau and Evan Neal, I think those fill the two biggest positions of need. That's going to help, either prove that Daniel Jones is the quarterback or prove that they need to move on from Daniel Jones by shoring up that offensive line. And I think they've been looking for a pass rusher for a long time. Again, maybe not a team that's going to be in playoff contention. You never know in the NFC East, though. But I think a team that could move up to, 6, 7 wins, maybe if they get lucky in the NFC.
Yeah, I agree that I really like what they did this offseason. I just don't believe in Daniel Jones, and I think he's going to hold them back. And it's going to be painfully obvious at the end of the year that they need to move on at quarterback, because I think this will be the first time in his time in New York that he's not just a part of the problem, he's the primary part of the problem. Last few years, you could easily point to that offensive line, at times point to the defense and say, he's not getting a fair evaluation because of how porous these units are. And that was true to a large extent, but I think he also showed himself that he's not a franchise quarterback in the NFL. So I think in the end that's really going to be what weighs him down, now that the rest of the team, like the offensive line, are a lot stronger than they have been in recent years.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think next year they'll probably end up looking for a quarterback, probably in the draft. Now I think we can move on to a team that didn't add a ton of pieces, but added a massive piece in the Broncos when they traded for Russell Wilson. And I think the quarterback was really the last piece of the puzzle the Broncos needed. It's kind of unfortunate for the Broncos that they're stuck in the AFC West with Justin Herbert and Patrick Mahomes. It's going to be really fun to see those three quarterbacks fight to see who will win the AFC West. But I think they did exactly what they needed to do to put themselves back in playoff contention and really in the position that they were in last in 2015 when they last had Peyton Manning.
Yeah, I think the Broncos are the biggest winner of this entire offseason. They're probably going to have the biggest jump in terms of number of wins. Maybe if we think the Jets and the Lions are going to win 3 or 4 more games than they did last year. The Broncos finished 7-10. I think that they're going to be winning 12 games, or maybe if think everything really clicks and Wilson finds his prime career form again, maybe even like 13. So if you look at the whole roster, the defense is good. They added Randy Gregory, which you're hoping is going to help unlock Bradley Chubb, get him back to the potential that we saw his rookie year. On offense, there's so many young pieces. I think Javonte Williams is primed for a real breakout year. He's going to become one of the better running backs in this league. I'm very confident in that. And then thankfully, it sounds like the news with Jerry Jeudy wasn't too severe. He should be available to them and very much in their plans. They've got Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, KJ Hamler's back from injury. There are a lot of weapons in this passing game. I'll even say Greg Dulcich, if he can adjust to the NFL quickly, could really be adding more explosiveness to that offense. So Wilson has so much to work with. The line is solid, probably the best offensive line he's had in a while. The defense is good. And the thing that makes you wonder is if there's a lot of change. It's a new quarterback, a new head coach. Will they be able to gel? Because on paper, the Broncos have the ability to be one of the top 5 teams in the NFL and go contend for a Super Bowl.
Oh, totally. And I think we knew this last year. We knew that they were a loaded team, and it really fell on Drew Lock's shoulders, and he did not step up to the challenge. So they said, we need to go find ourselves a quarterback. We don't like any quarterbacks in the draft. Let's go get Russell Wilson. And they knew what they needed to do. They did it. And they're, like you said, a great team on paper. They're loaded at wide receiver. They have a great young running back. And I think they brought back Melvin Gordon. So I think they can kind of keep the load off of Javonte Williams a little bit till they need him more later down the stretch. Like you said, that defense really solid. I would not be shocked to see them win the AFC West. I would not be shocked to see them third in the AFC West, and that doesn't say anything about the Broncos. That just says everything about how good the AFC West is.
Yeah, I would put my money on first in the division, actually, because I think Kansas City might have some tough time adjusting to losing Tyreek Hill. He was a big part of that offense. There's no understating it. Mahomes was iffy at times during the regular season. I could see a similar scenario where it's up and down the regular season. They end up having a good playoff push, but the Broncos win that division. That's something that I could definitely see happening.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Broncos in, the second or third seed in the AFC when the playoffs come around.
Yeah. Another team that finished below 500 in the AFC that I think can improve, and it's not as obvious as the Broncos, are the Ravens. And I know that the first thing everyone thinks about is the wide receiver core after losing Hollywood Brown is really subpar. And it is. There's no getting around that. I would like to say that Rashad Bateman is a player that I really like. I think he's primed for a big breakout year. And Mark Andrews is kind of a guy you can equate to a wide receiver one. I mean, he came on so strong last year, showed he's one of the top 3 tight ends in the league. And aside from that, they're a run-first offense. They've got the blocking tight ends. They've got a really good offensive line that got fortified in the offseason with Morgan Moses at tackle and Tyler Linderbaum at center. They've got running backs that hopefully this year will stay healthy. I mean, this is a team that, as I said, is a run-first team, and they lost all their running backs to season-ending injuries before the season started and had to make do with veterans that are way past their prime. So I think last year is just something you have to write off. It's even impressive, especially considering that Lamar Jackson was hurt for part of it, and they did get to 8 wins. John Harbaugh's a really good coach. They drafted really well. With his coaching and their drafting, they're consistently in the playoff picture in the AFC. I think they really had a big infusion of talent across the board. The draft was a large part of the reason for that. They have a lot of depth so that if they get hit with injuries again, I think they can withstand that a little better. Hopefully, the running backs, Lamar Jackson, stay healthy. If that's the case, they could be pushing for 12 wins again.
Oh, totally. And I think we've reached the point in the NFL where you don't necessarily need a wide receiver one, you need a pass catcher one.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Mark Andrews equates to a wide receiver one. He's not a wide receiver, but he's a pass catcher one. He's the best receiving threat on that team. But I mean, I agree. Rashad Bateman's going to be a really good combination with Mark Andrews. And they kind of lost their deep threat in Hollywood Brown. I'd mention a rookie tight end in Isaiah Likely that I think could be a potential deep threat because he's not really your prototypical tight end. He's not a great blocker, but he's really quick for his size, and I think he could be a guy that maybe they play more of a wide receiver role based off of how lackluster that wide receiver room is, and he can make some plays with Lamar Jackson, but I expect them to be, like you said, 11, 12 wins, maybe winning that NFC North.
Yeah, I think that we might see some 2 tight end sets from Baltimore just because it'd be weird that they'd pick Charlie Kolar and Isaiah Likely in the 4th round from that position when they have Mark Andrews if that's not the plan. I also love the pass catcher one tag that you pretty much introduced right here because that's really true, and it goes not only for tight end but also for running back. I mean, Alvin Kamara last couple of years has been the pass catcher one for the Saints, so you can't just look at the receiver room when you're analyzing that. And of course, the Ravens, they're a run first team. If the pieces are back healthy, they could be clicking. And now another team in the same division who had a losing record, who we would think won't have it again, are the Browns. This hinges a little bit on whether or not Watson will be receiving a suspension. If he does, 6 games is a long time, and if I don't know who that quarterback would be. I don't know if after all
Baker.
this you're bringing back Baker Mayfield. Well, that would really be something, and I don't think they'd win many games in whatever situation they have with Watson not starting at quarterback for that to happen. But let's say he doesn't get suspended. Right now, he isn't. I think they've got a really good roster. Amari Cooper was one of the best. The trade for him was one of the best moves this offseason. It was for a mid-round pick or something. We saw wide receivers go left and right for much, much higher draft capital. He's still a really good player. I liked it. I thought they drafted well, got some good values like Martin Emerson and David Bell in the 3rd round to round out that team. I think the Browns can definitely be a good team in 22. It just one thing that makes me wonder is, Watson took a year off. There was so much talk around his whole situation, both with the contract and with the allegations against him. How does he respond? Is he going to go out there and try to do too much to play hero ball and try to silence the doubters, so to say? Or is he just going to be the really top quarterback that we've seen from him in previous years?
Just to touch on that Amari Cooper trade, the Browns sent a 5th and swapped 6th round picks. So
wow.
I think that trade has really gone under the radar. Prepping for this podcast, I forgot that they had traded for Amari Cooper. But it was a great trade, and I think they could, Watson and Cooper could make a great quarterback wide receiver tandem, and they have a great running game with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt still there. So I think the Browns, assuming Deshaun Watson doesn't get suspended for more than, I'd say, 4 games, I'd expect the Browns to have a winning record and fight for a playoff spot come December and January.
Yeah, definitely. Another team that we gotta talk about here. It feels like we can only really come up with the Lions and the Jets as teams that could take a big step forward, that were at the top of the draft order, and we don't even really think they're going to have winning records. But wow, these teams that were hovering around 500, we could see a lot of improvement. Another one is the Dolphins, because they got a new head coach in Mike McDaniel, who it's hard to evaluate from the outside how a head coach is going to fare, but he is very, very respected around the league. People think very highly of him. He's going to be bringing, that Shanahan running scheme that is so successful. He's got one of his own running backs from San Francisco, Raheem Mostert, added Chase Edmonds too. So I think part of what hurt the Dolphins offense in recent years is that the running back position was really lackluster. And while the names aren't there, I think we could be seeing the production that's typically been the trend in San Francisco, where McDaniel's coming from. And then, they added Tyreek Hill. I mean, they added one of the top 3 receivers in the NFL. You've got Hill and Waddle. The explosiveness is out of this world on that offense. I'm a little concerned that they won't fully harness it because McDaniel comes from San Francisco, where the offense is built around run after the catch, not around going deep. And Tua is maybe comparable to Jimmy Garoppolo in terms of arm strength and tendency to go deep. It's not really the biggest part of his game. That being said, while it would be a little bit of a waste of Hill and Waddle's explosiveness, I think they would thrive in those roles. And so we could see a Miami offense that's clicking, that gives a fair evaluation of Tua, and hopefully it's a step forward for him. And I think the defense looks pretty good too. So, the Dolphins could end up being a high-end team in the AFC.
Yeah, I think it all really falls on Tua's shoulders, and if he can, 1, stay healthy, and 2, get the ball consistently to Tyreek and Jalen Waddle, and their wide receiver 3, potentially Cedric Wilson, he also falls under that, quick wide receiver that will thrive and then run after catch role. The one thing that concerns me a little bit is all their wide receivers are very similar. And I don't think that will really hinder the team too much, but it's just interesting to consider that they're all small, fast guys, and they don't really have a big, 50-50 ball guy that's going to, catch a jump ball in the end zone too much. So, Tua's not really the guy that I would expect to throw those kinds of balls either. He's normally pretty safe with the ball, and he's not really going to tend to throw those contested catches too much. But, I mean, I agree. I think the Dolphins are a really talented team on paper, and I think that, they're another team that in a loaded AFC will be in contention for the playoffs. Not sure they'll make it just because of, the large number of, really talented teams, but they'll be in contention, and I wouldn't be shocked to see them, 7 or wild card spot.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Teron Armstead was also a really important addition there.
Yes.
To give Tua, he's a good distributor of the football. You go back to Alabama, that's what he did really well. He just hasn't had the time to do that. Armstead was a key addition at left tackle. Now, I think the last thing we can talk about before maybe we talk a little bit about teams that didn't improve and might be taking a step back, close off this podcast. But before that, the Chargers were a team that we all know what happened in Week 17. They had pretty much that play-in game.
Week 18.
Week 18, true. With the Raiders, they ended up losing that on the most controversial of ways at the end of the game, and all those decisions with timeouts and all that. But that doesn't change the fact that it's a talented roster, and they filled their needs. I mean, they were one of the teams with a clearer set of needs. They needed to fortify the right side of that offensive line. They got Zion Johnson to do that in the first round. They needed a top-end cornerback. They got that in J.C. Jackson, and they needed to defend the run better. And they didn't make any big, flashy additions there, but getting Sebastian Joseph Day and Austin Johnson will go a long way towards doing that. So, it's tough because they have their strength of schedule is through the roof, and that AFC West, they got better on paper. I just don't know how much better they can get in terms of record because of that. And because I'm not the biggest believer in Staley as a head coach, especially seeing what transpired towards the end of the season with them missing the playoffs, that he showed some flaws there.
Yeah, and I think he definitely showed a lot of flaws, but I think at least I hope that he'd learn from all of his mistakes and he won't make those same mistakes again. I think if he does, then we really need to start questioning it. But he's a first-time head coach, and I think we just I would like to give him the benefit of the doubt a little bit and say, you know what, if you make all these mistakes once, don't make them again. Great learning experience, and like you said, really good team on paper that filled – basically, they had 3 big needs, and they filled all 3, I'd say. And the last team that we can mention really quickly, the Las Vegas Raiders, not a big number of additions, but 2 big names in Chandler Jones and Devontae Adams. And Devontae Adams fills that wide receiver one role immediately. Arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL. Traded 2 first-round picks for him, which I think is, or 1 first-round pick, right? The first and the second.
First and the second, yep.
I think that's totally worth it for a guy like Devontae Adams. And Chandler Jones, still getting old, but still a really good pass rusher. And sucks that they're in the AFC West, but things could fall many different ways, and I wouldn't be shocked to see them in the playoffs.
Yeah, well, we'll see if Josh McDaniels can really bounce back from his first head coaching experience in the AFC West. Who do you think is going to be a team that's going to take a big step back if we're looking at the other side of this?
Ooh, a big step back. I mean, there's not much of a big step to take, but I think the Bears really hurt themselves with how they approached the offseason. They lost their wide receiver one in Allen Robinson and didn't fill the need at all. And I wouldn't be shocked to see them picking 1, 2, or 3 in the draft come 2023.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you're looking at you need to help out Justin Fields. I don't think the offensive line is quite there. The receiver core, it's headlined by Darnell Mooney and Byron Pringle. That's not going to help Justin Fields. I don't think they did enough to get him on track and to take a step forward next year. I'm going to say that looking at a playoff team that could take a step back, the Patriots. I'll admit it, I'm a Patriots fan, and this is my frustration coming out. But this has been a really subpar offseason for the Patriots. There's just a lack of talent on that defense that I don't think Bill Belichick can keep making up for by his brilliant defensive coaching. You have a linebacker core where Jawan Bentley is the only solid starter. You're going to have Mac Wilson starting, potentially someone as inexperienced as Josh Uche or Cameron McGrone at corner. I mean, we're talking about having to defend against the Bills passing offense with Stephon Diggs, the Dolphins passing offense with Tyreek and Waddle, and the cornerback one is probably Malcolm Butler, who's way past his peak and will probably be leaving a more sour taste in Patriots fans' mouths than he did about almost a decade ago now. And I on the offensive side of the ball, it's not great either. The offensive line, it got downgraded by losing Shaq Mason, and the wide receiver room is still really lacking explosiveness. So I think the Patriots are a team that could surprisingly come in at 6-7 wins.
Yeah, I think another playoff team to mention that I don't really think is going to make the playoff this year, the Philadelphia Eagles. They kind of snuck in at 9-8 with that 7th seed, and I'm not a true believer in Jalen Hurts, so I don't really think they'll make the playoffs this year. Jalen Hurts could prove me wrong, but not a team that I think will make the playoffs, and I think they'll probably end up taking a step back and maybe looking at quarterback next year. Right before we wrap up, give me a team that we talked about that didn't make the playoffs this year that you would bet your money on making the playoffs.
I would bet my money on the Ravens. I can't see them missing missing it again. They've been just so consistent under John Harbaugh. I think that they're going to probably not get unlucky this time around with injuries as much as they did last year. Added all the depth, added a lot of the talent. I think the Ravens will be back in the playoffs, and they could they are right now my pick to win the AFC North. There's uncertainty around Cleveland with the Watson situation. The Steelers are dealing with a rookie quarterback. The Bengals, they could suffer a Super Bowl hangover. I think the Ravens win the North.
Yep, I had 2 teams in mind. One was the Ravens, the other one's the Broncos. I mean, adding Russell Wilson to that offense could be lethal. I don't know who's going to win the AFC West. I would not be shocked. I think it's between them and the Chiefs if the Chiefs figure it out. But, I mean, I'd say 50-50 right now winning the AFC West. I think they're Super Bowl contenders.
Yeah, the AFC West is going to be so fun to watch. So thank you everyone for watching this episode. We'll see how the tables turn, whether or not we'll be right with all this. But there was a crazy amount of movement this offseason in the NFL, and we'll see how it all plays out. We'll be back with another episode of the Bull Take Scouting Podcast pretty soon.